Tonight, I'm sharing 5 chilling stories that will make you question what's beneath your feet in Seattle. The first story involves a locked iron door deep under Pioneer Square, and by the end, you'll understand why no one should ever try to force it open. And if eerie stories like this keep you curious and a little afraid, make sure you subscribe now. I share new tales of the unexplained every single day. This account comes from Evan, who spent 2 years working as part of a small construction crew hired to do maintenance and restoration work in Seattle's underground. He said he thought he'd heard every ghost story tourists like to pass around on those guided tours. Flickering lights, old voices, cold breezes out of nowhere. But what he experienced one night wasn't a story to amuse visitors. It was something he still doesn't talk about without lowering his voice. Evan said the job was decent money, even if the hours were unpredictable. The underground passages had to be worked on at night to avoid interfering with the tour groups, and there was something about being down there after dark that made everything sharper, more unnerving. He'd walk past broken glass shop windows, hollowed-out storefronts, and long stretches of brick tunnel that seemed to swallow sound. The only illumination came from work lamps they strung up temporarily, throwing hard white light that always seemed to leave too many shadows. One night, his crew was assigned to clear debris and inspect a section near Pioneer Square that hadn't been touched in decades. Evan and 2 others were down there past midnight, the others sweeping while he worked at removing warped wooden planks and broken glass. That's when he noticed the wall. It wasn't remarkable at first, just more aging brick and faded mortar. But tucked in the corner was a shape that didn't quite match, an outline in the wall itself framed in rusted metal. He brushed away dust and found what looked like a door, half hidden under grime. Not a wooden door, not like the old storefronts they sometimes uncovered. This was iron, thick, and bolted shut. The surface was streaked with rust, but there were marks that made his stomach twist. Scratches. Dozens of them. Fresh. The grooves cut deep, lighter in color than the surrounding decay, as if something or someone had been clawing from the other side. He called one of the others over, a guy named Lewis. "You see this?" Lewis squinted, then shrugged. "Some drunk probably came down here, messed around with tools. You know how people get." But Evan couldn't shake the feeling. The scratches were uneven, frantic, not like someone idly scraping metal. They ran down the center of the door and clustered around the edges where it met the frame, like fingers trying to pry their way out. The bolts were on their side, on the outside, which meant whatever was behind the door had been locked in. They joked about it, because what else could they do? But when the shift ended, Evan couldn't stop thinking about that door. A week later, he came back alone. He told himself it was curiosity. He just wanted a better look. Maybe even pry it open a little, see if it led to another blocked-off passage or hidden room. He waited until the others were gone, then slipped back down the stairs with a flashlight in one hand and a crowbar in the other. The underground was dead silent. No sweeping, no chatter, no hum of generators. Just the sound of his own boots echoing against old concrete. He reached the section near Pioneer Square, found the familiar wall, and aimed his light at the door. The scratches seemed sharper than before, more pronounced in the beam of the flashlight. His chest tightened as he crouched, running his fingers along one groove. He swore the edges of the scratch flaked like fresh metal. He set the crowbar against the first bolt. It took effort, but it began to give, squealing against rust. The sound echoed down the corridor, too loud in the silence. As he worked at the second bolt, he froze. A sound came from the other side of the door. A scrape. Slow, measured, as though someone had dragged something heavy across the floor. He stumbled back, heart hammering, flashlight jerking across the wall. The sound stopped as soon as he moved. He stood there in the cold air, breath shallow, listening so hard his ears rang. And then came the whisper. It wasn't words. Not exactly. More like the shape of words without breath. A low murmur, muffled, but undeniable, seeping through the iron. He bolted. Evan said he didn't stop running until he was out on the street, lungs burning, flashlight bouncing wildly. He didn't care that he left the crowbar behind. He didn't care that the door remained bolted. He didn't even care if anyone found out he'd gone down there alone. He never told his crew what he heard, only that he didn't want to work in that section again. Months later, on his last week with the job, one of the supervisors mentioned the door in passing. He said the city used to lock up problem areas in the tunnels to keep people out. Safer that way, he said casually. Better left sealed. Evan didn't argue. But every time he thinks back to that night, he swears the scratches weren't old. They weren't the result of vandals or kids sneaking in with knives. They were desperate, fresh, and they were on the wrong side of the door. The second story involves a tourist who thought echoes were harmless until he realized they were leading him somewhere. And if stories like this keep you curious and uneasy, make sure to subscribe. I share new tales of the unexplained every single day. This account comes from Jared, a software engineer who had just moved to Seattle for work. He was the kind of guy who didn't believe in ghost stories but loved a good dare. When coworkers told him about the underground tours, he signed up without hesitation, rolling his eyes at their warnings that the tunnels weren't somewhere you wanted to wander off alone. Jared said the tour started like any other. Groups of visitors shuffling along the uneven floors beneath Pioneer Square, led by a guide with a flashlight and a voice trained to sell history as entertainment. He found the broken shop windows fascinating, the old storefronts left frozen like a forgotten museum. But he got bored fast. Half an hour in, he started lagging at the back, snapping pictures on his phone, barely listening to the guide's well-rehearsed jokes. The air down there was stale, cool, tinged with dust and dampness. His sneakers echoed against the worn wood planks, a hollow sound that carried farther than it should have. That's when he noticed it. At first it seemed normal, his footsteps bouncing back at him a half-second later, but as the group moved on and his pace slowed, the echo didn't. When he stopped, it stopped. When he started again, it started again, except a fraction too fast, as though whoever was following the sound of his steps had longer legs, a quicker stride. He called out, laughing nervously, "Anyone there?" Only silence answered, thick and muffled. He hurried to catch up with the group, but the echo stayed with him, sometimes one step behind, sometimes two, never exactly matching. The guide led them to a section where the tunnels split into multiple paths, most blocked off with chains or wooden barriers. Jared hung back again, angling for a photo of the branching darkness. That's when he heard it clearly. Not just footsteps, but a second set of breathing, shallow, uneven, right behind him. He spun, flashlight beam cutting through dust. The passage was empty, but the echo wasn't. It came again, faster this time, running steps pounding hard against unseen wood. Jared froze, waiting for someone to barrel into him. Nothing came. The group was already ahead, their voices muffled. He had a choice, run after them or follow the sound that was pulling him down the side tunnel. And Jared, who prided himself on logic, chose the wrong one. He told himself it was an acoustic trick. The underground was full of strange sound pockets. Maybe there were other tours. Maybe it was water dripping, wood shifting. He lifted his phone flashlight and stepped past the barrier. The air changed immediately. He said it felt heavier, wetter, like stepping into a basement where the walls sweat. The passage narrowed, his light catching on brick walls marked with old graffiti and peeling paint. The echoes didn't fade as he moved. They grew louder, sharper, as though the sound was following him instead of bouncing back. Every few steps, he swore he heard another sound mixed in, a faint laugh, quick and breathy, always cut short before it finished. The tunnel curved, sloping downward slightly, until Jared realized he had no idea which direction he had come from. His phone battery ticked lower. His hands trembled. Then ahead, he saw movement. Not a figure exactly, more like the shadow of one, darting just out of reach of the beam. He quickened his pace. The echo quickened too. By the time he reached the end of the tunnel, he was running. His phone shook in his hand, light jerking across damp brick until it hit a wall. Solid, no doors, no windows, just brick. And in the silence that followed, the footsteps stopped too. For a moment, all Jared could hear was his own ragged breathing. Then, right at his back, so close he felt the air stir, came a single sharp exhale. He spun around. The tunnel was empty. But his phone screen flickered, camera app open without him touching it, and on the screen was an image. A photo. Of him. Taken from behind. Jared bolted, stumbling through the dark until he found the barrier again, heart in his throat. When he caught up with the group, the guide frowned. "You shouldn't wander off. It's easy to get lost down here." Jared didn't argue. He just pocketed his phone, screen still trembling faintly. When he looked at his photo gallery later, the image was gone. But sometimes, when he scrolls through old pictures, a corrupted file shows up between shots of friends and skyline. Always the same frame. Always him. Seen from behind.
The third story involves a shopkeeper who found a bricked-up stairwell beneath her store, and by the end, you'll understand why I keep a rug nailed over a door I wish I'd never opened. If stories like this get under your skin, subscribe and ring the bell. I post new horror stories every single day. This account comes from me, Claire, the accidental owner of a narrow antique shop a few blocks off Pioneer Square. My aunt left me the shop, along with the stubbornness that kept it alive. She'd been one of those meticulous people who wrote on index cards and taped them underneath everything. Teacup, hairline crack, turned toward the pattern. Waverly mantel clock, wind to the 8 only. Mirror, do not lean. When she got sick, I watered the ferns and turned the open sign for her. When she died, I promised I'd keep it going a while and decided privately that meant 3 months. But the place has a way of feeling like it's listening. I kept finding her notes in new places and, I don't know, shutting the lights at night felt like tucking in someone who'd asked nicely. There was always a rug behind the counter that didn't match anything, a heavy braided oval my aunt refused to sell no matter how often people asked. Under it sat a trapdoor with a cast iron ring. When I first found it, I told myself the same thing she used to say. It's just storage I don't need. For weeks, I pretended it wasn't there. Then one rain-heavy afternoon, the bell on the door rang twice with no one entering. The shop went still in that special Seattle way, and ignoring it felt ruder than looking. The hatch groaned open like something remembering how. A short set of wooden stairs dropped into a low room lit by a single bare bulb on a pull string. I pulled it. The light wobbled awake, throwing jaundiced edges on boxes and the metal fan my aunt always meant to fix. It smelled like cold coins and wet paper. I climbed down, felt the floor flex under my weight, and nearly went right back up. What stopped me was the far wall. The mortar on most of the basement bricks was rough, gritty with salt bloom from damp. The section in the back corner was smooth and tan, a seam of carefulness where the rest was crude. I pressed my fingers to it and came away dusty. When I wiped them on my jeans, the powder left a pale vertical line like a scar somebody tried to hide with makeup. I don't know what made me fetch the hammer. Stubbornness, maybe? Or the tiny, mean curiosity that makes you push a bruise. The first strike rang too loudly. The second knocked loose a skitter of grit. On the third, a brick sagged inward, and a breath of colder air rolled out, carrying a smell like dried plaster and linen shut in a trunk. I worked the claw under the brick and pried. It gave. 2 more, and the shape of an arch appeared. It wasn't a professional patch. It was a secret with bad technique. Behind the bricks was a stairwell. The steps fell away steeply, treads cupped by long use, banister polished by hands I tried not to picture. I told myself I'd take one look, one photograph to show a contractor, and patch everything back. I grabbed my flashlight, kept the hammer in my other hand, and went down. The first thing the light found was a table set for dinner. Not staged the way we do it in a shop for photos. This was mismatched and earnest. Blue willow plate beside a plain white one, a glass with a crack that caught the beam like lightning, forks that didn't belong to their knives. Dust softened everything, but the arrangement felt deliberate. A sofa sat against the wall with an Afghan slumped across its back, the kind of pattern I've seen 100 times in cardboard boxes left by grandchildren. A china cabinet leaned a little, but kept its dignity. Inside, teacups nested in saucers, some with edge chips my aunt would have turned toward the wall. Then I lifted the beam and saw the writing on the plaster opposite. Names. Hundreds of them. Some careful as school copybooks, others small and angry, gouged in with something sharp. Mina. Ruth. J. DeVore. A scroll of dates beside a handful, 1931, 1947, 1966. The plaster around a few names had been worried and recarved, as if someone had come back to deepen their mark. My throat tried to say who and came out as dry air. I moved closer, flashlight trembling, and read line after line until I reached a small, careful hand I recognized even in stone. Ava Mendez, 1969. My aunt's maiden name. The loop's exactly hers. I knew her when she was old and brisk. Seeing proof of her as a younger woman down here, quiet and patient with a pocket knife, rearranged the room and my chest in the same instant. The bulb on the stair hissed and went out. The flashlight still worked, but it felt suddenly insufficient, like my hand had become a smaller hand. In the dark, the room found its noises, soft, private, domestic. A chair foot whispered on wood. Something tapped metal on ceramic the way flatware does when someone thinks while eating. There was the smallest rasp against plaster, the repeat of a careful motion. Scratch, lift, scratch. When I swept the light back to the table, the glass with the hairline crack had turned so the flaw ran up and down, not diagonally. One chair had pulled a finger's width from the table. A fork that had been hanging half off a plate when I arrived was gone. I didn't look for it. I didn't look for anything. I went up. I slammed the hatch. I dragged the rug over it. My hands shook so hard I wrapped a heat cup twice and still tied the string wrong. For a day, I convinced myself I'd misunderstood a lot of ordinary things. Dust unsettles. Old rooms settle. Shadows turn edges into tricks. I opened the shop at 10, sold a postcard rack I'd been meaning to get rid of, and answered twice as many questions as there were customers because words took up more space than what was sitting below us. That night, when I was counting the till, there was a square of paper on the counter that hadn't been there when I locked the door. Not one of my aunt's index cards. I would have known the look of those in a pile of snow. Lined paper torn from a notebook, the pencil strokes tall and leaning like a child's. Thank you for the forks. I slept badly, and when I slept, I dreamt I was under the table listening to people I loved eat without saying my name. In the morning, I put the note in the sink, burned it with a match, and turned on the tap too long afterward, as if water could make paper forget it had been legible. You'd think that would be where any sensible person stops. You'd be right. I am not always sensible. The next afternoon, I took a better light, the kind that straps across your forehead and makes you look like you mean business, and a little digital camera.
I told myself I needed to document it for a contractor, for my brother, for someone wiser who would say, yes, that's a relic of the old underground, and point to a city record with a stamp and a boring explanation. I pried up the hatch again. The bulb didn't even pretend this time. The air coming up had a scent I couldn't name at first, then realized I'd known all my life. A linen closet opened after a winter. Starch and cold air and a sweetness that isn't a smell so much as a memory of one. I went down and felt the room wake to me. The table was set more tidily than before. The forks sat at obedient angles. 2 plates were paired by pattern like a mother trying to make near twins out of cousins. The cabinet's door hung open on a marble, as if someone had propped it for me. The notebooks inside leaned together like people conspiring. I picked one at random and opened to a page in a small, severe hand. We can hear them upstairs. They do not come down. We decided to carve our names. We decided not to speak above a whisper in case the whisper learns to love itself and becomes a voice. I closed it and something moved very carefully at the edge of the room, weight placed where it wouldn't creak. I killed my headlamp without meaning to. I think my thumb just panicked. Everything around me took a step closer. The quiet wasn't empty. It was attentive. I stood still long enough to know exactly where the stairs were with my bones. When I turned the light back on, the wall of names had a new powdery reach below my aunt's, just 2 strokes scratched, the start of a C and the pole of an L. It felt less like a threat and more like an invitation written in a language I didn't like. I ran, and this time I didn't just drop the rug, I nailed it. 2 nails, then 4, then 8. 1 in every corner, the heads brassy against the braid. I slid a trunk on top of it and called my brother the next day to help me move furniture, something I've never asked him in my life. He came, he lifted, he grinned about my renovation phase, and he left me with new shapes that made it harder to see where the floor dips and which boards complain. I tried to be practical. I called a contractor who's done work in the neighborhood, a man with patience and sawdust on his jacket. I started to say, there's an old stairwell under a patch in my wall, and he said, lady, if it's under there, leave it under there, in a tone that sounded more like superstition than advice. I hung up, embarrassed and grateful.
The shop kept being a shop. People came in to tell me the bell sounded like their grandmother's kitchen. A grad student bought a map and asked if I knew where the original street levels ran. We rolled it over the counter and traced the old routes with the backs of our fingernails. A kid in a yellow raincoat played a game with his mother, where he touched nothing while almost touching everything, palms hovering millimeters over porcelain like heat. When he reached the back corner, he whispered, "Someone downstairs," and then louder, "Mama, a party," and I offered them a discount out of guilt I couldn't justify. On a Tuesday, the doorbell rang with no hand, and I stopped pretending it was drafts. On a Thursday, an egg cup that lives forever in the second row had migrated to the first when I turned around. On a Friday, I pulled the cash drawer and found a small marble rolling end to end in a slow, loyal circle, refusing to hit the sides. I put it in my pocket and felt it warm up like something alive. 15 minutes later, it was gone, and the cabinet downstairs had its door propped again in my mind. I bought a can of expanding foam the next morning. It felt impolite and necessary, like saying no to a neighbor who won't leave. When I pried the hatch, the air that rose wasn't angry, it was expectant. I stood at the top and squeezed the trigger. White meringue grew into the seam around the hatch, into the gap where the stair's mouth met the floor. It hissed like a small, patient animal. When it touched the old wood, it quieted, as if the boards had shushed it themselves. I hammered 2 more nails through the rug for good measure and told the floor, "I hear you, and I'm tired." People ask me if I'm going to sell. They don't know what they're asking, and I don't know what I'm answering. I keep the hours my aunt kept, because changing them feels like picking a fight. I still find her index cards in places I'm sure I've cleaned, and once I turned over a tray and saw a faint brown oval where a wet note had rested long enough to stain. The words were gone to blur. People ask me if I'm going to sell. They don't know what they're asking, and I don't know what I'm answering. I keep the hours my aunt kept, because changing them feels like picking a fight. I still find her index cards in places I'm sure I've cleaned, and once I turned over a tray and saw a faint brown oval where a wet note had rested long enough to stain. The words were gone to blur, but I could still make out the shape of a Y and a K, like "thank you," dissolving into pulp. Some nights I linger too long after closing. The city breathes through the glass, the bell sits quiet like a cat, the floor holds its opinions. If I hear the soft drag of a chair under the boards, I speak out loud to the counter, "We're closed," because I can't bring myself to say it to the rug. And when customers ask about the rug that doesn't match, I tell them the truth that sounds like a joke. It's not for sale. I know I could move to a brighter space with less personality and more foot traffic. I know a good realtor. I know better than to ask the room below to prove itself again. But now that I've seen my aunt's name among all those others, now that I've understood how people survive by being witnessed, I can't unlearn the obligation of keeping the floor intact. If you come in and see me glance toward the back corner mid-sentence, it's because I'm counting the way the air rests on my skin. If you hear the bell ring when no one walks in, I'll smile and say hello to the empty door and mean it. And if you ever find yourself behind a counter with your hand on a braided rug and a thought you shouldn't have, don't. Some doors were only ever meant to open once.
The fourth story involves a night worker who took an elevator past the bottom floor and found something he was never meant to see. If stories like this keep you hooked, make sure you subscribe. I post new horror tales every single day. This account comes from Robert, a janitor who worked nights in one of Seattle's older downtown office buildings. He was used to silence, long hallways, and the way the city sounded far away when the world above went to sleep. Robert said the building was older than most people realized. What sat on the street now was the modern face, but below it ran basements and sublevels layered like sediment, some dating back to when Pioneer Square was new. He'd worked there long enough to know which pipes banged on cold nights and which floors were safe to mop last because the lights flickered. But one shift in late winter changed the rhythm. It was near midnight when he loaded his cleaning cart into the service elevator. He pressed B1, the lowest basement, where the boiler room sat. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making everything hum like an old radio. At first, everything was normal. The elevator shuddered once, began its slow descent, and the floor numbers blinked down. But when it passed the B1 light, the elevator didn't stop. Instead, it jolted, then kept going. Robert frowned, pressing the button again, then the emergency stop. Nothing responded. The hum of the machinery deepened, groaning like gears grinding against time. The panel lights flickered, then steadied on nothing, no floor indicated at all. The air changed too. It grew colder, damp, and smelled faintly of earth. Robert gripped the cart, trying to tell himself it was a glitch. Older buildings had quirks. He'd seen elevators misfire before. But they always stopped somewhere. This one didn't. The car rattled, slowed, and then, with a final sigh, came to a stop. The doors shuttered, then slid open. What lay beyond was no basement he recognized. The hallway stretched out in both directions, lined with brick walls sweating with moisture. The air was still, heavy, as if it hadn't moved in decades. A faint light glowed from hanging bulbs, but they looked old, thick glass, filaments faintly buzzing. He stepped out, heart pounding, and the doors slid shut behind him. He turned quickly, but the button panel on the wall was blank. No call buttons, no lights, just smooth metal where controls should have been. His cart rattled as he pushed it forward, wheels squealing on damp concrete. The hallway bent left, and as he turned, he realized the walls were marked. Not graffiti, exactly, more like smudges, handprints darkened by years of oil and dirt. Dozens of them, pressed into the walls at shoulder height, smeared like people had braced themselves there, waiting. The corridor narrowed until he found himself in a wide chamber. It was furnished like an office frozen in another century. Desks lined the walls, all old oak scarred with knife marks and ink stains. Rolled blueprints lay scattered, chairs tucked neatly as if workers had stepped away just moments earlier. A dusty calendar hung crooked on the far wall, April 1924. Robert's stomach dropped. He whispered, "Hello?" The word echoed too long, as though the walls stretched and bent to hold on to sound. He turned back toward the elevator, but the doorway was gone. In its place was just another stretch of brick. His cart sat there useless, leaning slightly, one wheel squeaking in small, nervous rotations. A sharp click echoed. One of the hanging bulbs buzzed brighter, and for a moment he swore he saw movement at the far desk, a chair pulling back. Another sound followed, a pencil scratching across paper. Robert froze, breath shallow. His ears strained. The sound came again, long and deliberate, like notes being written. But the desks were empty. He edged closer to the calendar. The page was curling, but the date struck him. It was marked over and over with heavy black lines. Every square of April 1924 crossed out, except for one. April 17th. The day wasn't marked. It was circled. Twice. He didn't know why, but the sight filled him with dread. Then, suddenly, every chair in the room scraped backward at once. The noise was deafening in the enclosed space, wood shrieking across concrete. Robert stumbled back, hitting the wall, heart hammering. The scratching pencil sound grew louder, overlapping itself until it sounded like dozens of hands writing at once. His flashlight shook in his grip. He swung it toward the sound, and the beam caught a desk where paper curled in the stale air. Words appeared across it, written by nothing. "Stay." The air thickened, pressing against him. He forced himself to move, slamming his shoulder into the wall where the elevator should have been. And the wall gave way. The elevator doors groaned open behind him. He stumbled inside, leaving the cart behind. The doors clamped shut, and the elevator groaned upward with an unnatural lurch. When it stopped, the panel read B1 again. The boiler room was there, humming quietly, exactly as it should be. Robert told himself he'd imagined it, that it was exhaustion, stress, an old building. But the next day, when he went back to the elevator, he found his cart waiting in the corner of the basement. Wheels muddy, paper still fluttering faintly on top. He swore he had left it behind. And when he checked the paper, words were scrawled across it in heavy, deliberate strokes. Stay.
This last account comes from Lily, a student at the University of Washington who was always the first to volunteer for ghost tours, late-night dares, or anything that promised a little adrenaline. She thought she had a high threshold for being scared until the night she went into the Seattle underground and found a room that wasn't supposed to exist. If stories like this grip you, subscribe and ring the bell. I share new horror tales every single day. Lily had tagged along with 3 friends on the underground tour. At first, it was all fun. The guide was funny, the stories about buried storefronts and glass sidewalks felt like stepping into an urban legend. She snapped photos until her phone battery hit 2%, then stuffed it in her pocket, annoyed. That's when things shifted. Her friends lingered near the guide as he pointed out an old storefront, while Lily bent to tie her shoelace.
By the time she looked up, they'd already turned a corner. She hurried forward, expecting to catch up, except the hallway she entered didn't look like the others. The bricks were darker, almost blackened. The lamps overhead buzzed faintly, the kind with thick glass and exposed filaments. The air smelled of damp plaster and something metallic. She called out, "Wait up!" Her voice echoed strangely, too long, almost like it didn't belong to her. At the end of the corridor was a wooden door. Not the kind the tour had shown, not a shop front or display. It was heavy, painted once but now peeling, with no knob, just a latch. She hesitated, heart fluttering, then pushed it open. The hinges moaned, and the door revealed a small square room. No windows, just a single bulb swang faintly from a wire. Her first thought was that it had been a holding room, maybe for storage. But the longer she stared, the more wrong it looked. Every inch of the walls was covered in handwriting, names, hundreds of them, carved with nails or knives, written in fading ink, some in chalk that had smeared into ghostly smudges. There were dates too, 1915, 1927, 1952, entire decades catalogued on the walls, scrawled by people who had once stood where she now stood. Her skin prickled as she walked slowly inside. The bulb buzzed overhead, swinging just slightly. She ran her fingers over one name, Eleanor H., 1938. The grooves in the plaster were deep, frantic, like whoever wrote it had pressed until their fingers bled. Then she saw the papers. Stacks of them in the center of the floor, curling at the edges, yellowed and fragile. She crouched, lifted one carefully. The writing was hurried, lines overlapping. "We can't get out. Don't follow them. Don't listen." Another page. "The door closes on its own. We tried to hold it. It doesn't matter." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She dropped the paper and the whole stack slumped like a body. She turned toward the doorway. The door she'd left open was closing, silently. No draft, no hand, just swinging in on itself. She lunged forward, slamming her hand against the latch before it clicked shut. She yanked it open, and the hallway beyond looked darker than before. The buzzing from the lamps rose into a static hiss, filling her ears like pressure under water. And then she heard them. Whispers. At first she thought it was her friends, but the voices were too many, too layered, too close. They poured into her ears, into her chest. Not words exactly, until one emerged clear, low, cutting through the noise. "Write your name." The bulb above swung harder now, throwing shadows across the names, making them seem to writhe and twist on the walls. Her breath caught. She stumbled back, nearly losing her grip on the latch. The whisper came again, louder, like dozens of mouths speaking at once. "Write your name." She bolted. She didn't look back at the room, didn't check if the door stayed open. She just ran, shoes slapping wet stone, heart punching her ribs. The whispers chased her, tumbling down the hallway, until mercifully she saw the faint glow of the guide's flashlight ahead. She stumbled back into the group, her friends laughing at some joke she'd missed, completely unaware she'd been gone. She didn't say a word until she was above ground again, gulping in the damp night air of Pioneer Square. Later, back in her dorm, she remembered her phone. She opened her gallery. The last photo she had taken was from earlier in the tour, before her battery had died. But there was one more image. Her own hand, pressed flat against a wall of names she swore she had never touched.